The Galactic Prosperity Collective had exactly 347 member species, and precisely none of them had evolved from apex predators. This was not, as some might assume, a coincidence. It was policy. Sensible policy, really, when one considered that civilization required a certain baseline level of not wanting to rip your neighbor's throat out over a parking dispute. The collective's founders, in their infinite wisdom, had determined that species which climbed to the top of their respective food chains tended to bring certain unfortunate baggage to the diplomatic table. Aggression, territorial instincts, an embarrassing tendency to solve problems with violence rather than the 14-step conflict resolution protocol outlined in the Harmonious Coexistence Manual, 3rd edition. So when humanity came knocking with their application for membership, the collective's Xenological Assessment Bureau did what they always did. They studied, they analyzed, they compiled reports that could kill a small tree analog, and they concluded, with the satisfied certainty of bureaucrats everywhere, that humans were harmless. Omnivorous, technically, but leaning heavily herbivore. Evolved from tree-dwelling fruit eaters. Small teeth, pathetic claws, laughably weak bite force. They had to cook their food for star's sake. What kind of predator needed to pre-digest their meals with fire? The assessment practically wrote itself. Category 7, harmless, suitable for immediate diplomatic integration. The fact that humans had conquered their entire planet, eliminated or domesticated every species that posed even a mild threat, and somehow turned warfare into both an art form and an industrial complex was filed under historical quirks, probably not relevant. The assessment team was on a deadline, after all. 3 years later, the collective learned what happens when bureaucracy meets biology, and the lesson was delivered by Chen. Though, to be fair, she was really trying not to deliver any lessons at all. Kira had been with the diplomatic corps for 18 months, which was approximately 17 months and 3 weeks longer than she had expected to survive the transition from special operations to glorified paperwork. The job description had promised cultural exchange, peaceful engagement, and representing humanity's best interests abroad. What it actually involved was smiling through 47 different variations of how do you humans manage without a proper pheromone gland, and pretending that the station's idea of coffee did not constitute a war crime. The Aurora Station orbited a neutral moon in the Tertius sector, which made it the perfect location for species who wanted to interact without the messy business of actually visiting each other's planets. It housed roughly 2,000 permanent residents representing 83 different species, all crammed into a spinning wheel of habitation modules that smelled like a spice market, had a fight with a chemical plant, and everyone lost. Kira's official title was Assistant Diplomatic Attaché for Human Affairs, which sounded impressive right up until you realized it meant she was the complaint department, cultural translator, and apparently the station's only source of information about why humans kept trying to pet things that very much did not want to be petted. She shared her office space with 3 other species representatives. There was Ven, a Quilari, whose species had evolved from something like a nervous rabbit crossed with a philosophical squid. He spent most of his time calculating risk probabilities and gently vibrating with anxiety about hypothetical scenarios. Then there was Zesh, a Korthan who looked like someone had given a praying mantis delusions of grandeur and a business degree. Zesh's species were obligate herbivores who had turned risk aversion into a competitive sport. The third was Oriel, who belonged to a species called the Methani, graceful things that moved like dancers and communicated in harmonics that made every conversation sound like a sad wind chime. Prey species, obviously. Everything in this station was prey species, except for the humans, but nobody had figured that out yet. Kira had learned to move carefully around them, slowly, deliberately. No sudden movements, no direct eye contact unless they initiated. Never position yourself between them and an exit. Basic predator protocol, inverted. It was like being a shark trying to convince goldfish you were totally one of them by swimming in really weird patterns. She had almost convinced herself she was good at it. The morning the pirates arrived, Kira was drowning in paperwork. Real paperwork, not the digital kind, because the Quillari legal system did not recognize data storage as sufficiently permanent and had somehow infected the entire station with their paranoia. She was 3 pages into a complaint filed by a Hixian merchant who was deeply offended that a human tourist had asked if they were edible when the station's alarm system started making a noise like a whale having an existential crisis. Ven immediately froze. Not like a human freezing, which implies the possibility of movement. He went rigid in a way that suggested his evolutionary ancestors had survived by becoming very good at impersonating furniture. Zesh's head swiveled 180 degrees, those compound eyes processing information in a way that Kira's forward-facing predator vision could not quite track. Then he bolted, which would have been more impressive if he had not immediately run into a filing cabinet. Auriel's harmonics went sharp and discordant, hitting frequencies that made Kira's teeth ache. The station's public address system crackled to life, and a voice that sounded like someone gargling gravel announced, "This is Commander Thrak of the Valkor Raiders. This station is now under our control. Resistance will be met with violence. Compliance will be rewarded with continued existence. You have 3 minutes to process this information before we begin forcible asset reallocation." Kira blinked, ran that through her mental translator. "They are robbing the place." "Raiders," Fen whispered, his skin shifting through color patterns that probably meant something in Quillari, but just looked like a screensaver to Kira. "Valkor Raiders. Oh, ancestors. Oh, distant progenitors. Oh, every generation that survived so I could exist only to die here. The security forces will handle this," Zesh said, though he was now pressed against the wall in a way that suggested he did not actually believe that. Auriel was singing something that might have been a prayer or a eulogy, possibly both. Kira stood up, moved to the door, and looked out into the corridor. Other beings were emerging from their offices and quarters, a rainbow coalition of panic. A Hixian merchant was attempting to hide behind a potted plant that was significantly smaller than they were. 2 Methani were harmonizing in what might have been a fear duet. A group of Quillari had formed a cluster, presumably for mutual comfort, though it really just made them one convenient target instead of several inconvenient ones. Down the corridor, she could hear the distinctive sound of security personnel trying to organize a response, which is to say, she heard a lot of high-pitched discussion and the clatter of dropped equipment. The station's security force was representative of the collective's philosophy. Diverse, inclusive, thoroughly trained in de-escalation techniques. They had completed a 6-week course in nonviolent conflict resolution and wore armor that was rated to protect against harsh language and stern disapproval. They were not prepared for the Valkor. Nobody really was. The Valkor were what happened when a species evolved on a planet where survival of the fittest meant everyone else died screaming. They were not members of the collective, obviously. They were barely members of their own society. Bipedal, heavily muscled, with natural armor plating and a cultural philosophy that boiled down to take what you want and kill anyone who objects. They were one of the 17 predator species that the collective had identified and collectively agreed to avoid like a cosmic plague. The fact that they were here now, boarding a station specifically because it was supposed to be safe, was the kind of irony that would have been funny if people were not about to die. Kira watched through the doorway as the first Valkor came around the corner. He was massive, easily 7 feet tall, covered in what looked like organic armor plating and carrying a weapon that was probably compensating for something but was also extremely effective at creating holes in things. Behind him came 4 more. They moved like soldiers, coordinated, efficient. They knew what they were doing. The station security personnel, bless their hearts, attempted to form a defensive line. They held up their non-lethal deterrent devices and made statements about unauthorized access and violation of collective treaty subsection whatever. The lead Valkor shot the first security officer without breaking stride. The corridor erupted into chaos. Screaming, running, the kind of panic that happens when prey animals suddenly realize that all those safety protocols were just suggestions. And the universe does not actually care about their survival. Kira felt something shift behind her eyes. Something old. Something that 18 months of diplomatic training had tried very hard to bury. She had joined the diplomatic corps because her commanding officer had suggested that perhaps, after 12 years of special operations work, she might benefit from a role that involved less killing and more talking. She had agreed because she was tired, because she wanted to believe that humans could be the peaceful species that the collective thought they were. She had really, genuinely tried. But evolution does not care about your career goals. The Valkor were spreading through the station now, moving with the kind of efficiency that spoke to experience. They knew where the valuable materials were stored. They knew where the communication hubs were. They were not here for random violence. This was a professional operation. Professional except for the part where they were terrifying everyone and had already killed 3 security officers who had made the mistake of believing that rules applied to everyone equally. Kira turned back to her office. Ven was still frozen. Zesh was muttering prayers to deities who were statistically unlikely to intervene. Oriel was making sounds like crystal shattering. "Stay here," Kira said. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone except me." "Where are you going?" Ven managed to ask, his voice about 3 octaves higher than normal. Kira considered lying. Considered saying she was going to find help or contact the human embassy or any of the other comforting fictions that would make this seem like a situation where there were good options. Instead, she said, "Somewhere else," and left before they could ask follow-up questions. The corridor was a mess of abandoned belongings and fleeing civilians. The Valkor had split into teams, each one herding groups of station residents toward the central plaza. Classic hostage scenario. Control the population, control the station. Kira moved against the crowd, which should have been difficult, but was not because people instinctively moved out of her way, even though she was smaller than most species here. Some part of their prey animal brains recognized that something about her movement pattern was wrong. That she was not fleeing, that she was moving with purpose toward the danger instead of away from it. She passed a Mathani family huddled in a doorway and had to resist the urge to stop and help. Training said establish control of the tactical situation first. Her instincts said protect the vulnerable. She compromised by making a mental note of their location and continuing forward. The station's layout was burned into her memory from 18 months of walking the same routes. She knew the maintenance corridors, the service tunnels, the places where the designers had prioritized function over form. More importantly, she knew where the humans lived. Because humans, being humans, had immediately claimed the section of the station closest to the cargo bays. Partly because it was convenient for trade, mostly because nobody else wanted it due to the noise and the smell and the way human habitation zones always seemed to accumulate a sort of organized chaos that made other species uncomfortable. The human section of Aurora Station was home to maybe 200 people. Traders mostly, engineers, a few families. The kind of folks who had looked at humanity's comfortable position in the collective and decided that the real opportunities were out here in the frontier stations, where regulations were more like gentle suggestions. Kira found them in the middle of a discussion that would have been comical if the situation were not so dire. Marcus Webb, who ran a shipping company and had definitely never been military despite moving exactly like someone who had been military, was standing in the center of the human commons arguing with about 30 other people. "We need to organize," he was saying. "Find weapons. Take back the station." "That is the worst idea I have heard today," countered Sarah Park, who ran the human quarters closest thing to a restaurant and had absolutely been some kind of operator before retiring to the exciting world of attempting to make alien ingredients taste like Korean food. "The moment we show organized resistance, they start executing hostages." "So we just hide?" That was Tommy Okonkwo, young, maybe 25, who had come out here to work as an engineer and was now vibrating with the kind of fear aggression that got people killed. "We wait," Sarah said firmly. "Collective response teams will handle this. That is why we have treaties." "The collective's response teams are 6 hours away," Marcus said. "These raiders will clean out everything valuable and be gone in 2. Kira cleared her throat. Every human in the room turned to look at her, and she watched the recognition spark in several faces. They knew who she was. Some of them knew what she had been. "They have already killed 5 security officers," Kira said without preamble. "They are herding civilians toward the central plaza. I count 20 raiders, possibly more. They are armed with high-energy plasma weapons and are operating with military precision. This is not a random attack. They have planned this." "Fantastic," Marcus said. "So we are definitely not waiting 6 hours. We are definitely not doing anything stupid either," Kira said sharply. "You all want to know why I am here instead of in special operations? Because I did stupid things with the best possible training and it still nearly got me killed. You are civilians now. You stay that way." "And what are you going to do?" Sarah asked, and there was something knowing in her expression. Kira had been trying very hard not to think about that question. "I am going to go talk to them," she said. "Talk," Marcus repeated flatly. "Negotiate. See if we can arrange a peaceful resolution." It was an absolutely terrible lie, and everyone in the room knew it. But it was the lie that they could all live with. The lie that meant when the collective auditors came asking questions later, everyone could honestly say that the human diplomatic attaché had stated her intention to pursue peaceful resolution. What she actually did after that was between her and her conscience. Kira left before anyone could volunteer to come with her. Because civilians had families and futures, and she did not need their deaths on her conscience along with all the others. The maintenance tunnels were exactly as unpleasant as she remembered. Narrow, poorly lit, smelling like recycled air and mechanical desperation. But they ran parallel to the main corridors and offered access to most of the station's critical systems, which meant they also offered access to anyone who knew how to navigate them. Kira had spent her first month on the station memorizing these routes because old habits died hard, and knowing the terrain was the difference between living and dying, even when you were supposedly living a safe, boring, diplomatic life. She moved quickly through the tunnels, tracking her position by the color-coded piping and the subtle changes in air pressure that indicated where the main corridors were. She could hear sounds filtering through the walls, shouting in multiple languages, the distinctive whine of energy weapons warming up. The kind of general pandemonium that happened when predators invaded a prey species station. Her hands were shaking slightly, Adrenaline, probably, or the knowledge that she was about to do something phenomenally stupid. Could be both. She found an access panel near the central plaza and cracked it open just enough to see out. The plaza was the station's heart, a wide-open space designed for commerce and social gathering. Right now, it was a prison. The Valcour had corralled maybe 300 civilians into the center of the space and were systematically looting everything of value from the surrounding shops and offices. It was efficient, brutal, the kind of operation that spoke to experience. 4 Valcour stood guard over the hostages, weapons ready, watching for any sign of resistance. The rest were spread out in teams, breaking into secured areas, hauling containers toward the docking bay. Kira counted, assessed, calculated odds that were absolutely terrible. 20 raiders, maybe more, all armed, all trained, all members of a species that had evolved specifically to be good at killing, versus 1 human with no weapons, no backup, and a deep desire to not become a diplomatic incident. She almost laughed. Then she saw one of the Valcour strike a Quillari merchant who was not moving fast enough. And the laugh died in her throat. The Quillari went down hard, their color patterns flashing distress, and none of the other hostages moved to help because what could they do? They were prey species facing predators. This was the nightmare scenario that their evolutionary history had prepared them for, which is to say, it had prepared them to freeze or flee, and neither option was currently available. Kira felt something old and angry unfold inside her chest. She had spent 18 months being careful, being gentle, being the kind of human that the collective wanted to believe existed. Harmless, peaceful, safe. But safe was never what humans were. Adaptable, yes. Intelligent, absolutely. But safe? Safe was a story humans told to make other species comfortable. The truth was that humans were pursuit predators from a death world. And the only reason the collective had not figured that out was because humans were also really, really good at lying. Kira opened the access panel fully and stepped out into the plaza. The nearest Valcour guard noticed her immediately. He turned, weapon rising, mouth opening to shout an order or a threat or whatever Valcour did when something unexpected happened. He did not get the chance to finish. Kira moved. Not fast by human standards, not the explosive sprint of an Olympic athlete or the practiced strike of a martial artist. Just the steady, purposeful movement of a predator that had identified prey. She crossed the distance between the access panel and the guard in 4 strides. His weapon was still rising when she reached him. He was stronger than her, tougher, better armored. Under normal circumstances, this would be a fight she could not win. But circumstances were never normal when humans were involved. She went low, inside his guard, using his size against him. Found the weak point in his armor plating at the joint where his neck met his shoulder. Human thumbs, it turned out, were really excellent at finding pressure points when you knew anatomy and did not mind getting uncomfortably close to something that wanted to kill you. The guard made a choking sound and dropped his weapon. Kira caught it before it hit the ground. The other 3 guards noticed. For a moment, nobody moved. The plaza was frozen in a tableau of violence, interrupted. 300 hostages watching. 3 remaining guards processing what they had just seen. And Kira, standing over a disabled enemy, holding a weapon she definitely knew how to use, and absolutely not pretending to be normal anymore. The guard closest to her raised his weapon. Kira shot him. Not with the careful, measured response of someone following rules of engagement. Not with the hesitation of someone who valued all life equally. She shot him the way you shoot a target on a range, with the muscle memory of 10,000 repetitions and absolutely no uncertainty about whether this was the correct decision. He went down. The plaza erupted into chaos for the second time that day. But this chaos was different. This was not the panic of prey animals fleeing. This was something the collective species had no evolutionary context for. This was what happened when the predator you did not know was a predator stopped hiding. The remaining 2 guards opened fire, but they were shooting at where Kira had been, not where she was. Humans had learned to fight on a planet where standing still meant dying. Movement was instinct. She was behind a stall, rolling, coming up with the weapon already tracking targets. 2 shots. Both guards down. 4 seconds. 4 targets. The hostages were screaming now, but not at the Valkor. They were screaming at her. Kira did not have time to process that. The rest of the Valkor raiders had noticed. She could hear them coming, heavy footfalls, shouting in their guttural language. At least 12 of them, probably more, all armed, all confused about what was happening. Good. Confusion was a tactical advantage. Kira grabbed a Mathani civilian who was frozen near her position. Get everyone to the emergency shelters. Seal the doors. Do not come out until you hear all clear from station security. The Mathani just stared at her with those 2 large eyes. Now, Kira said, and something in her voice must have translated across species barriers because the Mathani moved, pulling others with them, a chain reaction of motion as the hostages scattered. The first group of Valkor raiders burst into the plaza. They saw her immediately. 1 human, 4 dead guards, hostages fleeing. Their leader, a massive specimen with decorative scarring that probably meant something in Valkor culture, roared something that was definitely not an invitation to negotiate. Kira shot him first. Then she ran, not away. Humans did not run away from threats. That was the whole problem. Humans ran toward threats, around threats, through threats. Humans had looked at every predator on their home planet and decided that the solution was not to avoid them, but to outlast them, outsmart them, or just be more stubborn about surviving than the universe was about killing them. She moved through the plaza using terrain the way her instructors had taught her, cover to cover, never presenting a static target. The Valkor were faster in a sprint, but humans could turn, twist, redirect. Persistence hunting did not just apply to prey. She picked off 2 more raiders as they tried to set up a crossfire. They were fighting like soldiers, which was good for them, but bad for her, because soldiers were predictable. They followed doctrine. They tried to establish fields of fire and suppress movement. Kira did not suppress well. She vaulted over a vendor stall, rolled, came up shooting. 1 raider went down. She was moving again before his body hit the ground. Ammunition would be a problem soon. She was working with a looted weapon and had no idea how many shots it held. Probably not enough. A plasma bolt sizzled past her head close enough that she smelled burning hair. Definitely not enough. She ducked into a side corridor, reloading by feel, and found herself face to face with Ven. Her office mate was pressed against the wall, his skin flashing color patterns that probably meant abject terror. Behind him were Zesh and Oriel, both looking equally panicked. "What are you doing?" Kira demanded. "We heard shooting, came to help." Ven's voice was shaking. "Are you hurt?" "Am I?" Kira stopped, took a breath. "You 3 need to get to the emergency shelters right now." "You are fighting them," Zesh said, his voice somewhere between awe and horror. "You are fighting the Valkor." "I am buying time for the collective response teams," Kira said, which was technically true if you ignored the part where she was also systematically eliminating hostiles, like this was the career she had supposedly left behind. "You killed them. Oriel sang, the harmonics dissonant with shock. "I saw. You moved so fast. How did you move so fast?" Kira did not have time for this conversation. She could hear more Valcor coming, and the corridor was a terrible place for a firefight. "Humans are persistence hunters," she said shortly. "We evolved to track prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion." "Do you understand what that means?" "We are built to outlast things that should be able to kill us. Now get to the shelters before I have to explain to your respective embassies why I let you die standing in a corridor asking stupid questions." She pushed past them and was mildly surprised when none of them followed. The next 20 minutes were a blur of violence that Kira would later struggle to describe in her incident report. The Valcor had numbers and firepower. She had intimate knowledge of the station's layout and absolutely no regard for fighting fair. She used maintenance tunnels to flank them, shut down lights to force them into kill zones, vented atmosphere in one corridor because the raiders were not wearing proper pressure suits, and she was mean enough to exploit that. It was not elegant. It was not even particularly honorable. But it was effective. By the time the collective response teams arrived, exactly 6 hours late as predicted, there were 3 Valcor raiders locked in a cargo hold, 12 dead throughout the station, and 5 who had apparently decided this job was not worth it and fled in their ship. Kira was sitting in the plaza, surrounded by looted energy weapons, trying very hard not to shake from adrenaline crash. The response team was led by a Hixian commander, who took one look at the scene and made a sound like air escaping from a balloon. "What happened here?" the commander asked. Kira considered her options. Considered lying. Considered the fact that there were definitely security recordings of everything she had just done, and lying was pointless. "I negotiated aggressively," she said. The commander stared at her, then at the weapons, then at the scorch marks on the walls, then back at her. "You are the human diplomatic attaché?" "Yes." "You were assigned here for cultural exchange and peaceful engagement." "That is accurate." "There are 12 dead raiders and—" The commander checked a data pad. "Preliminary reports suggesting you personally engaged approximately 20 hostiles with a combination of small arms fire and creative use of environmental systems." "Negotiation is a flexible term," Kira offered. The commander made that deflating balloon sound again. The aftermath was messy in the way that violence always was. Medical teams treating the injured, forensic teams documenting everything, diplomatic teams from every species represented trying to figure out what this meant for station security going forward. And the human residents of Aurora Station looking at Kira with a mixture of pride and concern because they understood what she had done and what it meant. Kira spent 4 hours giving statements to various officials. Then another 2 hours in meetings with station administration. Then a final, deeply uncomfortable conversation with her superiors in the diplomatic corps who were trying to figure out how to spin "Attaché goes full special operations and eliminates pirate boarding party" into something that did not make the collective question humanity's classification as harmless. They eventually settled on calling it an isolated incident of exceptional circumstances requiring unusual response protocols. Kira called it Tuesday and submitted her resignation effective immediately. She was walking back to her quarters, exhausted and sore and wondering if there were any jobs left in the universe where people would just leave her alone when she found Ven waiting outside her door. "You lied to us," he said without preamble. Kira sighed. "Which part?" "All of it. You said humans were harmless, that you evolved from tree-dwelling fruit eaters." "We did. We just ate a lot of other things, too. You said humans had weak bite force and pathetic claws. Compared to many species, We do. We just built better claws. Ven's skin flickered through several color patterns. You are predators. You are all predators. Kira leaned against the wall and looked at her office mate, this nervous, gentle creature who had probably never hurt anything in his entire life. Yes, she said simply. We are apex predators from a death world. We hunt in packs, track prey for days, throw projectiles with accuracy no other species can match. And we are really, really good at pattern recognition. We can read emotions on alien faces that did not evolve to communicate with us. We can hear sounds that should not matter and notice details that should be irrelevant. We are built to find things that do not want to be found and chase things that can run faster than we can until they cannot run anymore. Then why? Why did we lie? Kira laughed bitterly. We did not lie. We just let you make assumptions. Your assessment teams looked at our biology and saw omnivores with poor natural weapons. They looked at our history and saw civilization, art, philosophy. They decided we were harmless because we wanted to be diplomatic. But you are not harmless. No, Kira agreed. We are really, really not harmless. We are just really good at choosing not to be harmful. There is a difference. Ven was quiet for a long moment, processing. What happens now? Now the collective figures out what to do with a species that is technically classified as safe, but can apparently fight off raiding parties through creative application of violence. Now every other member species looks at humans and wonders what else we have not been honest about. Now everything changes. The Council will want to reclassify humanity? Probably. As predators, almost certainly. You do not seem concerned. Kira shrugged. We were always predators, Ven. The only thing that changes is now you know it too. She opened her door and paused, looking back at the Quilari who had been her office mate for 18 months. For what it is worth, we really do want to be peaceful. We really are trying to be the species you thought we were. But evolution does not just go away because you wish it would. And when something threatens our pack, she trailed off. Well, you saw what happens. She went inside and locked the door, leaving Ven in the corridor to contemplate the sudden realization that his species' entire classification system had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what humans were. 3 months later, the Galactic Prosperity Collective officially reclassified humanity as a Category 2 predator species with full diplomatic restrictions and mandatory observation protocols. The human representative to the Council, when informed of this decision, had simply smiled and said, "We understand completely. We will, of course, respect all restrictions and protocols." Nobody quite believed them, but that was the thing about humans. They had been living next to actual predators for 3 years already. They had been the predators, and they had done it while serving coffee, filing paperwork, and negotiating trade agreements. The collective would eventually figure out what that meant. That a species which had spent millions of years learning to hunt, learning to track, learning to read the world around them with a predator's focus, did not stop being hunters just because they wore diplomatic credentials and pretended to like herbal tea. They had just learned to hunt different things, like political advantage, trade opportunities, strategic alliances. The Valkor raiders had learned this lesson the hard way. They thought they were raiding a station full of prey species, easy pickings with minimal resistance. They had been right about almost everyone there. Except for one very tired human who had spent 18 months pretending to be normal, and whose predator instincts had absolutely refused to stay quiet when something threatened her pack. Chen took a job as a security consultant after that. She stopped pretending to be something she was not. And whenever new species joined the collective and asked about humanity's reputation, someone would inevitably tell them the story of Aurora Station. How a single human had taken down a raiding party not through superior strength or better weapons, but through the simple, terrifying application of persistence, pattern recognition, and the absolute unwillingness to let prey animals suffer when she could do something about it. The story usually ended with a warning. Humans are not dangerous because they are violent. Humans are dangerous because they are pack-bonding persistence predators who decided that everyone in their vicinity counts as pack. And there is absolutely nothing in the universe more terrifying than being hunted by something that will follow you forever and somehow convince you it is on your side, right up until it is not. The collective learned to live with that knowledge. And humanity? Humanity just kept being exactly what they had always been. A species of apex predators who occasionally remembered they were supposed to be civilized and who were, generally speaking, very good at staying quiet about the whole predator thing.